Nature of Society, Part 3, Session 2R. Protectionism is prevention. It is a defense. What is it that tariffs prevent? It prevents trade. It prevents goods that are coming in from other countries that the receiving country might produce itself. But trade is human action. Trade implies that men want to exchange goods and services with each other. Who then are the men against whose efforts trade protection preserves and defends us from? These men are foreign producers who wish to sell their goods in the local market. The assumption is that men are constantly trying to produce their products to force their products upon us, and tariffs are a means of defending us against what they want to do. Yet when closely examined, the desire of one party to trade, however strong it may be, cannot of itself bring about trade. There must be two parties for trade to take place, who mutually desire to trade. No one can buy unless he can find someone willing to sell, and vice versa. The great mass of the imports of every country consists of goods that have been ordered by the people of that country and are imported at their risk. It is the demand of consumers at the retail outlets that causes importation of goods. The protective tariff, then, is a prevention by a country, not of what a foreign country wants to do to an important country, but what the important country wants to do to itself. Trade, therefore, is not an invasion. It involves no aggression by the exporting country and resistance by the importing country, but mutual consent and gratification of each. There can be no trade unless the two parties agree. Japan may have forced trade upon the outside world. China similarly. In both cases, what was done was not to force trade on the receiving countries, but to force the receiving countries' governments to let the goods in. If there was no desire for importing or exporting goods, what would be the use of opening ports? What do you think? When countries trade, they do not use their armies to force other countries to open their ports. When countries are at war, they do use their countries to close one another's ports. Their efforts then are to stop goods from entering rather than leaving these ports, importing rather than exporting. The country then can be more easily damaged if goods are prevented from entering compared to exporting. So free trade is simply allowing people to buy and sell what they want to buy and sell. It is protection that requires force to stop people from doing this. Protective tariffs are synonymous to blocking the free passage of goods in the same way that an army does in times of war. The difference is that in times of war, nations prevent their enemies from trading, and in times of peace, nations prevent their own peoples from trading. So, this is what protection teaches us: to do to ourselves what in times of peace, what we would do to our enemies in times of war. What difference does it make whether we can or not make the things for which we trade? If we do not want things we are offered more than the things we can give, we would not wish to trade. It is simple as a farmer who wishes to exchange a horse he does not want for 2 cows from his neighbor that he does want. Should this trade be prohibited on the grounds that one should breed horses and cows rather than exchange? This is what protectionism is suggesting. In no one place does nature supply man with all that he needs. Trade permits us to obtain each of the things we need from the site and location best suited for its production. Trade allows us to utilize the best of nature in the optimum production of goods, with the labor producing at its most efficient and effective levels. Trade allows us to utilize the highest powers of the human factor in production. All men are not equal in their ability to do things well. There are differences in men's mental and physical powers, such that their abilities to supply human needs are of different degrees of aptitudes. When a special skill is developed, this enables men with the same quantity of labor to produce enormously more than men who have not this specialty. Here's another quotation from Henry George which speaks to this. And as there are differences between individuals which fit them for different branches of production, so, but to a much greater degree, are there such differences between communities. Not to speak again of the differences due to situation and natural facilities. Some things can be produced with greater relative advantage where population is sparse, others where it is dense, and differences in individual development, in habits, customs, and related occupations produce differences in relative adaptation. Such gains, moreover, as attend the division of labor between individuals, attend also the division of labor between communities, and lead to that localization of industry which causes different places to become noted for different industries. Wherever the production of some special thing becomes the leading industry, still is more easily acquired and is carried to a higher pitch, supplies are most readily procured, auxiliary and correlative occupations grow up, and a larger scale of production leads to the employment of more efficient methods. Thus, in the natural development of society, trade brings about differentiation of industry between communities as between individuals, and with similar benefits. It is characteristic of all the inventions and discoveries that are so rapidly increasing our power over nature that they require the greater division of labor and extend trade. Thus, every step in advance destroys the independence and increases the interdependence of men. The appointed condition of human progress is evidently that men shall come into closer relations and become more and more dependent upon each other. Thus, the restriction which protectionism urges us to impose upon ourselves are about as well calculated to promote national prosperity as ligatures that would impede the circulation of the blood would be to promote bodily health and comfort. This statement is taken from Protection and Free Trade. Men in different countries trade for the same reason that men in some countries trade, because it is convenient and profitable to do so. They obtain with less labor those goods that they would otherwise do. Goods will not come into any country unless they can be obtained by producing something more easily and exchanging it for them. To restrict imports is to lessen production and to reduce the fund from which state revenues are drawn. There is the notion that transporters, traders, the middlemen in the business of trade, unnecessarily lessen the wealth that producers and consumers can enjoy, that they extract an unfair quantity of wealth in any transaction. This is short-sighted. This is a short-sighted view because these middlemen are as legitimately producers as miners, farmers, or manufacturers. Transporting, distributing, and retailing are as necessary to the enjoyment of things as are extracting, growing, or manufacturing. These middlemen are as necessary as any other operation of production that without these, the transactions would be carried out in the most primitive fashion. An important aspect of middlemen's function is to hold things in stock, so that consumers may purchase them at such times, places, and quantities that are most convenient. The profits demanded of these middlemen may seem excessive, but this is usually due to the quantity and performance of services in the marketplace. If consumers had to go to producers directly for the small quantities desired, producers would have to charge higher prices for the expense of providing these additional services. If consumers had to go to producers directly, this too would involve expense and inconvenience to the consumer to reach the producer. What the middlemen do is to save both parties these inconveniences and expenses. Middlemen also effect enormous economy in the amount of commodities that will be necessary to keep in stock to provide for a given consumption, and consequently reduce the amount of loss from deterioration and decay. Just consider the amount of retail outlets that would be needed by the producer were he to adequately supply families, even for a month. Just consider the number of things such as fresh meat, fruit, vegetables, fish, which is impossible to keep on hand for any length of time, and for those items which could be kept longer, such as flour, sugar, oils. Each requires specialized storage arrangements and strategies to adequately reach the consumer, in a state that is acceptable. The producer may be in no position to supply these or be proximate to the consumer for convenience. In any civilized society today, there may seem to be too many of these middlemen, storekeepers, and distributors. The trader, however, is not a use exchanger who adds no value to the community, but transporting, storing, and retailing of these are as necessary a part of the work of supplying human needs as are growing, extracting, or manufacturing. It must also be pointed out that the investigator, the philosopher, the teacher, the artist, the poet, the priest, though not directly engaged in the production of wealth, as well as not in the production of utilities and satisfactions, to which the production of wealth is only a means, but by acquiring and diffusing knowledge, stimulating mental powers, and elevating the moral sense, may greatly increase the ability to produce wealth. As Henry George said, he who by any exertion of mind or body adds to the aggregate of enjoyable wealth, increases the sum of human knowledge, or gives to human life higher elevation or greater fullness, he is, on the larger meaning of the words, a producer, a working man, a laborer, and is honestly earning honest wages. But he who, without doing aught to make mankind richer, wiser, better, happier, lives on the toil of others, he, no matter by what name of honor he may be called, or how lustily the priests of Mammon may, saving their censers before him, is in the last analysis but a beggar man or a thief. Next week we will continue our discussion on trade. Before we end, I would like again to let you attendees know that Unsustainable Development is an educational offering devoted to the dissemination of its course to all of mankind and to those who have English language as their official language in the first instance, and to all eventually all around the world. To make this possible, and because we do not charge a fee for its dissemination, we rely wholeheartedly on monetary donations to meet the cost of achieving these goals. If you have found these sessions useful thus far and would like others to have access to them, We would gratefully accept your donations should you be inclined to offer them. You can send donations to our PayPal account at the email address nigelgittins@gmail.com. Thank you for your kind gesture.